Excellent.
Well, hello, ladies, gentlemen, and everyone in between. I am Diana Clarion, the Lavender Lady. This is Coffee with Lavender. How the heck are you? I am so sorry. I had some technical issues before we were starting. I dropped the internet. My internet connection dropped for about a minute and a half, and that caused a little bit of problem there. But hopefully, we've got everything taken care of. Hopefully,
Excellent.
yay. Well, hello. Oh, and look at what I did. I forgot to I forgot to mute the connect the watch connection that I have. I always do that. Why do I always do that? Anyway, about last week, I was looking through my Twitter feed, and there was a notice of a video on YouTube called Escaping Eden Chains Forged, which looked really, really, really interesting. And I took a look at it. And it happened to be one of the best videos I have seen in at least half my life, which is a pretty damn long time if you guys know me. It was done by a lovely lady by the name of Lilith Thompson. And she's here with me today to talk about the mindset of evangelical type folks. And how you doing, Lilith?
I'm wonderful. Thank you so much. It means so much to hear that the video was helpful to people and made a connection. That's wonderful.
Okay, and I'm going to check and make sure that everybody can hear everybody. So if you did not hear Lilith just speaking, please let me know, and I will panic and then take care of everything. Beautiful! Hey, it worked again. I'm amazed.
Great!
We finally
Okay,
figured this
good.
stuff out. Yay! So, okay, let's go at it. The first thing that you mentioned, and that I want to mention when we're starting here, is, if I remember correctly, you had emphasized that the evangelical person is not stupid.
No, or at least not necessarily. There are many different people caught up in evangelicalism for many different reasons. And yes, frankly, some of them are dumb as can be, but that's not the only reason that someone might be caught in it. And in a way, a more intelligent person can tie themselves up in knots trying to justify this thing that they feel they need to justify, and end up binding themselves in a far more complicated and convoluted way, which takes quite a while to fix.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so what basically is it that has somebody in the mindset? And I'm already anticipating two things. Okay, why would a person have that mindset?
Mm-hmm. Well, and this is, as I was discussing with you before, religion is a thing evolved. So the ideology has already picked up a lot of tricks and tips to implant itself in your mind. Basically, the person who always had a free mind does not understand and couldn't understand what it feels like to absolutely have to justify something at any cost whatsoever.
Yeah, I'm one of those people.
And that's, I mean, believe me, it's a much better thing to do, to always see ideas as a thing to be considered and questioned, never as a thing to invest your identity in and defend at all costs. But that's what evangelical Christianity especially does. And they either get you when you're young, when you're way too young to have any defense.
Mm-hmm.
They go after people when they're vulnerable. You know, maybe they've just lost loved ones. Maybe they've had several tragedies in their life, and they seem to come in and swoop in. And the key is to take whatever Christian cultural connections that individual may already have, grab their theological bent in, dig it into them, and keep them. And then it becomes very rooted in the identity to a degree that the person is almost not aware of, or they're aware of only in a very visceral sense.
Okay. Now, I mean, this is the person who's been imbued in it since the cradle. How about a convert? My sister, for example, is an example of a convert to Pentecostalism, um,
Hmm.
and she was well into that mindset when she converted at the age of, I think it was about 30. How about a person like that? Do you know
Was
if
she going through anything difficult at the time that might have made her additionally vulnerable?
that's something I wondered about, and I'm not exactly sure, but there may have been. I was
Yeah.
always wondering if it was a crisis conversion. Is that the way somebody is usually got at a later age?
Well, in my experience, I believe generally, I've seen in some cases where a person has been, in a sense, talked into it, but there's always something else going on. My dad made one of his friends Christian by they had just been friends for years and really talking and talking about in-depth things that mattered to them. And that sort of turned the corner. But again, this was many years after. I should clarify. My parents started as your hardcore, charismatic, claim the promise, evangelical wackadoodles. They calmed down.
Lilith, can you hear me?
Yes. Yes.
Your volume just went into the toilet. Okay, okay.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, I can. Whatever it was is now corrected.
Okay, good. Sorry, I was just saying my parents had started far more extreme and then calmed down over the years, moving between denominations to something a little more rational. They're still evangelical, but they're not quite that crazy, claim the promise, Jesus heals, blah, blah, blah.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Yeah, because I
For
had.
your
Say again?
I was just going to say, for your sister, you said that the two of you were raised Catholic.
Yes.
And so there would already have been a lot of key concepts that they could piggyback on that would have been rooted very deeply and say, well, you're almost right. And then it's far easier to redirect a core concept a little bit than to try and completely uproot it and put in something new.
Yeah, I know that she was a bit more Catholic than I ever was. She bought into the Catholicism more thoroughly. I was tending toward atheism at a very young age. I mean, I started falling away at about age 10 or 12.
Good
Um,
job.
so there's that difference between us. So maybe that might have also, as you say, been a head start in getting
Hmm.
her to just, okay, the car you're driving isn't quite the right one. Here, try this one.
Right, but it's close, so you can keep a few of the comfortable feelings and, tell people that this new version is more authentic, but it's a degree. Yeah.
Hmm. And okay, the big question I've got, the one I've always wondered about, if I remember correctly in your video, the one I just put the URL to in the side chat. By the way, everybody needs to look at that because it's a beautiful video. You had mentioned, how do I want to phrase this? That the view through the eyes is that person's view. That person has to have that view in order for the world to make sense. What I always wondered about was, why do they think that they have to make everyone else have that view? Uh, can the evangelical person be happy saying, what was it that Christopher Hitchens would say? We don't want heaven crowded. There's room enough in hell for you.
Oh,
Something
yes,
like
yes.
that. Yeah.
What was that hymn? Yeah, there's, yeah, we don't want heaven crammed. I remember him talking about that. Honestly, it's kind of, I think about evangelical Christianity a bit the way I think about Islam. I think the religion is a horrible, horrible, evil thing, but most of the people in it fundamentally want to be good, decent people. But the thing is, once you throw hell into the mix with a good, decent person, you can't just let people believe whatever they want. But there's a secondary level to it that you've probably noticed in recent American politics very much,
Yeah.
which is the dominionist drive. It's the idea
Yes.
that the idea is that God has declared a certain way that things ought to be. And the closer we get to that way, the better everything will be because it's God's way, and God's way is always right, which would make sense if he was anything like what they said. And so there's that driving force of pushing it towards this, as dictated by God, because he is the ultimate authority for what we should be doing.
And I love that word. We're going to come back to that in a little bit. Yeah. So is this the whole thing about the Dominions, especially getting into politics and trying
Mm-hmm.
to basically, if you want to say, take over the world, or at least the U.S.?
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah, absolutely. You know, Hitchens was right. They cannot be happy until the whole world bows the knee. It's one of the attributes, quite frankly, that evolved into the religion because that's what kept it pushing forward and pushing out. And the idea is it's multifaceted. There are so many ways. You're a good person, you don't want your neighbors to go to hell. You want the best for your country, you want God's way. But there's also this sense in which and the entire mindset is very archaic, very feudal kings, warlord type of thing. And you want to serve God's glory, and it is for God's glory that you turn your country into a Christian nation and and proclaim the name of Christ across the world and claim the land in the name of Jesus and so on and so forth.
Now, do you know offhand if that feudal mindset was a original feature, or if it came later in the medieval period, or
Honestly, it's very hard to tell about early Christianity. The first 100 years was a little bit of everything. It was a total, a sort of a well, actually, the first 200 years was a real mesh, and then they started to canonize. But it did come from Judaism. It came from the warlords and I am the biggest and the strongest, and my God is bigger and stronger than your God, and all the rest of that. So it's our very first, Hitchens again. It was our first attempt at politics, our first attempt at philosophy, our first attempt at healthcare. That brutal authoritarianism was the first thing we tried that worked slightly better than total chaos.
okay, and then yeah, we're starting to get into the authoritarianism, which is what I did want to come to,
Mm-hmm.
because you had said that you wanted to work on that authority thing on your next video, and okay, so part of it already is the authoritarian thing is just to prevent total chaos, but you'd also mentioned that it has unfortunate ramifications for women, and
Oh, absolutely.
how does this work? I mean, that they get it worse than men do, and of course, this is a rhetorical question here, guys, but it's got to go on the table.
No, and that's absolutely fair. And the thing is, it goes back to that time when women were considered property. And the people today who are trying to push that mindset, they won't explicitly say that because they want it to look better. But essentially, it is that attitude. And the way to get that rooted into a community, ironically enough, is to convince the women that this is the way things should be, and that a part of their identity as women and upholding that and being the best women they can be is to uphold this system that keeps them in a secondary position all the time. Yep.
Okay, so you are actually training them to want that.
Absolutely.
Oh
Absolutely.
my
And to
word.
think that they had to, and that's the thing, is that the discomfort that you feel inside at the very thought of that, because it is so wrong and so fucked up, that very discomfort can become the driving force in pushing harder for it to overcome your own scruples. Not that you would call them scruples.
Mm-hmm. Because when I would look at it from the outside, I don't know if you know, I used to work with a group called New Covenant Studios.
Oh.
The person who ran that was you would call him a pastor. He kind of had his own congregation, and
Mhm.
his wife evinced all the symptoms of being downtrodden. And I would always think, poor lady, and how does she feel being in that position? But you're telling me that very likely she was actually loving it and wanting it.
Well, yes and no. As I say, there's a lot of internal conflict, and that internal conflict can be very emotionally painful. But then at the same time, if you're clever, or if your pastor is clever, or you read clever people, they can convince you that that tension and that disconnect that you feel within yourself is the discomfort of the presence of God. And then you feel touched, and you feel special, and you feel like you really do feel God with you, and then that's taken as an affirmation of whatever bullshit they're trying to force you to do. So it's just, there are so many layers, and she may not have been enjoying it, but I will wager she probably felt that that was her place. And by, sort of your old, again, kingly, Henry V, if the king's cause is not just our fealty to him, wipes the stain of it from us. That idea that even if my husband is not doing the things right, if I am the submissive wife and I do everything God requires of me, then I have done my best in the situation, and I am justified in as much as I can be.
Oh my! And then something you had said, I don't remember the exact words, and it's only 5 seconds ago. Folks on the side, keep in mind when you get old, the memory is the second thing to go, and I forget what the first is. It mentioned something that keyed morality into my mind here. So that mindset there. Okay, so that is going to dictate the entire moral compass of
Absolutely.
these folks. And
Well,
okay,
yeah.
yeah, go on, go on.
No, I was going to say, ask your question, because that might help me bring my thoughts to a point.
Okay, because the thing I'm wondering is when they look, okay, when we tell them to look at their own book and judge the actions that are committed in that book. For example, the massacre of the Amalekites and that sort of thing. We see that as horrible, yet they actually try to justify it. They try to justify slavery. What is that all about? Is it because they
Well,
have to?
yes, it's absolutely because they have to. And the very, the decent part of them as a person who also finds that abhorrent is so uncomfortable that that discomfort almost drives their justifications more. And I've had this feeling, and there are many sort of, I don't know what to call them, kind of colloquial stories that go around, like, certain Christian, our archaeologists, and quotes around the archaeologist bit, had found apparently that there were some cultures in the Middle East that had been destroyed, where everyone had diseases and they were all promiscuous and had nasty, everything was, disease ridden and stuff. So basically that would be one of the reasons why God would make the people kill everyone, because there was no way to contain it. It was, in the cloth and the animals and the, of course, the assumption being they were doing all kinds of perverse sexual things. And if you study what is actually known about the Bible, know the story of Lot's daughters raping him and having children by him, by getting him drunk in a cave, which is totally plausible for an old man.
Especially a drunk old man.
Yeah, absolutely. Of course. I don't even know why they would question that. But that was the children they bore were the beginning of the Moabites and the Ammonites. And there's a lot of, and those were two cultures that they had frequent conflicts with. So there's a lot of retcon victim blaming
Mm-hmm.
all through those stories. And you can see that the urge to justify man's inhumanity to man, as the phrase goes, has been there from the beginning.
Yeah, because you brought it up. Some of the really strange stuff that goes on or is implied. Lot and his daughters, the whole incest thing there. They're fine with that, although they would decry it. Well, okay, some of them would decry it today. Okay,
Not in Alabama.
I can't tell you about deepest, darkest Arkansas, but
Oh, nope, 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 nope.
oh, I'm gonna have to check my soundboard on that one because whenever I start laughing like that, my audio input didn't go down that much. Okay, so that's a good thing. Oh man, yeah. So there's the other thing too. So they have to somehow inflict their moral compass on me and on you. And
Absolutely.
Why is it always sexual?
You've read 1984, I'm sure.
Oh, I most certainly have.
Absolutely. You know what? Let me see if I can call up the quote, because there's a section where Wilson is oh God, what are the names? He's talking to his girlfriend, and she doesn't pay much attention to history. That's not really what she's all wound up about. But on this other hand, she's part of the what is it? The Abstinence League.
Yeah.
And so, where they all focus on sex. And I can relate to this because the same thing with purity culture. There is this.
Okay, we've lost your audio again, Lilith.
Oh, damn it.
Oh, you're back now. You're back.
Okay, great. What was the last thing I said?
Let's see. Now, you had mentioned purity culture.
Yes. It's the same thing with the purity culture, where there's this fanatical push to sexualize everything in the name of avoiding sex, where you have things like the Christian side hug, about which there was the most appalling, tacky, cringe-making white rap a couple years ago. It was just...
Yes, I remember that.
Right through. Yeah, but then, I mean, think about it. They are sexualizing a hug, which 9 times out of 10 is not sexual at all.
Right.
And they're pushing this to young children who are maybe just at the beginning of even having some feelings that they don't really understand, and are told that so really what they're doing is sexualizing things to children to avoid sex. And it's the same thing in 1984. I'm just going to read, if you don't mind, this bit by Orwell.
Absolutely, go for it.
It was not merely that the sex instinct created a world of its own, which was outside of the party's control and therefore must be destroyed if possible. What was more important was that the sexual privation induced hysteria, which was desirable because it could be transformed into war fever and leader worship. And the way she put it was, when you make love, you're using up energy, and afterwards you feel happy and you don't give a damn about anything, and they can't bear you to feel like that. They want you to be bursting with energy all the time, and all this marching up and down and cheering and waving flags is simply sex gone sour. So it's that same thing where they don't want you to have any joys aside from the ones they have dictated to you, and they want to take all the energy of that very primal drive and use it to run their own engines.
Okay, that's interesting though, in the sense that maybe we've already covered this and I don't know it. Where do people like me, people like Kate, Bionic Dance over in the side chat, fit in? Because, we're not exactly straight.
No.
And what is it that is so bad about us, even if we were to fit the bill of heterosexuality that you were just speaking of, even if we were supposed to do those sorts of things, we'd still be wrong because we were doing it with the wrong people? Where's that come from?
Well, and that's very much the same thing, that where you've got the more rules you can put around something. And, it's funny, Matt Dillahunty mentioned that one of the ways that sort of broke him out of believing that these spiritual feelings and experiences were God was that he had, those same joys in totally other different contexts, music, sex, art. And that's part of the reason why they will have, you can only listen to the Christian music, which is a somewhat crappery, rip off of whatever's popular at the time.
Yeah,
and
Seth Andrews went into that.
Yeah, absolutely. The whole point is that you don't want the believer to experience any joy that is not connected to the ideology.
Okay, and then for whatever reason, the ideology includes screw the gays, but not nicely.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Well, they got around God's plan of punishing women for their sexuality with horrible childbirth, so we can't have that.
Yeah, okay.
But also, there's also that thing where if you get a person controlled to the point where they have no positive experiences that are not bound up with their Christian identity, then they will say and will mean quite sincerely, God is my greatest joy.
I have heard people say that, and I never understood it. And I think you're starting to help me understand a little bit about what's going on. I hadn't the idea that it was so complete. This is. You are immersed in it seems.
Absolutely. And the most important thing, because I am a Canadian, I was not as heavily immersed in the bubble culture where the entire everything around me was focused on making me that way. But if they can get your mind trained to create your own bubble, to create your own filters, to focus only on the things and the goals that they have set out for you, and then it becomes just self-perpetuating. And then God is your only joy, and you have no comprehension of how much joy has been stolen from you.
And then you had mentioned a little bit there about being instilled from the young kid and everything else, which brought to my mind, when we were talking about the sexualization of everything, I had an extremely, by most standards it seems, young puberty. I began puberty probably at about the age of 8, and I know that I'm not the only one out there. So when you've got somebody like me in a place like that, what happens to those kids?
Oh, well, oh God, that part's even worse. Okay, this is something I'm going to go over in more depth in a video on my own channel, but...
Oh, good.
There is something that I was taught probably from around the age of 8. Again, I have to kind of guess on my ages because a lot of this happened when I was really quite young. But there is a doctrine that at the last judgment, you will be brought to judgment and all your deeds will be laid out.
Okay, I've actually heard that one.
Yeah, for God, but also in front of the angels and the saints.
Yes.
Now, what that means in a little more detail is that everything you've ever done, and more importantly, everything you've ever thought, will be played out on a big screen in front of God and everyone you know and have ever known, including your parents.
Okay, the ultimate outing.
Believe that from the time you're 8 and see how fucked up your puberty is.
Yeah, because I mean, when you're the only one looking lasciviously at the girls in the class, you're an 8-year-old, you're already wondering what's different here, and then you put that into, okay.
Yeah, and I mean, you don't, of course, when you first start having sexual thoughts, you don't really understand them as sexual. There's sort of these drives and everything's a bit confusing. But you feel some natural shame because it's a very personal, embarrassed thing and you still don't understand why. But then you have to add to all of that anything you are even remotely embarrassed about is going to be paraded in front of everyone.
And they're already accustomed to that because there's so much back fence gossip that goes on in those communities.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And there's that sense that you're not allowed to hide things. You're not allowed to have your own inner life, or you are as long as it's perfectly pure. But, they have, when you're a teenager, they have accountability groups where they'll get a bunch of boys together to all encourage each other not to masturbate. And a bunch of girls will talk about, trying to build themselves up and what are the best strategies for keeping their purity. So you spend 10 times as much time talking about sex as someone who's having it.
Yeah, and that's got to be frustrating because
Just a little bit.
it's all out there, sex, 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 and we're not getting to do anything about it.
No, sex is like money. It's not important as long as you have it.
Yeah, so that's, oh my word, that's got to be the craziness thing here. Okay, what else have we got? Okay, one of the biggest things that has always made me wonder, because I'm trying to be a counter apologist, and I'm failing miserably at it. What is the best way to show people that their way isn't necessarily the only way?
For the people locked in that mindset, people like SJ that we've mentioned.
Yes. Everybody in the side jet knows her.
Yeah, oh God. But you can't actually, because one of the first things that they instill in you as soon as they've got a couple of the ideas locked in is that there is only one way. And so you cannot get them to understand multiple potentially good outcomes until you prove that their way is wrong.
Oh boy. And okay, let me make a note of that, and I'll come back to that when you finish your sentence.
Well, and part of it has to do with, you'll find a great deal of apologetics tries to make the concept of standard into something honestly a bit hazy and a bit numinous. The idea is that if you try and make things better, then there is one perfect standard. It's sort of like Plato, like in the one perfect chair in the cave and all that. There's a single perfect ideal that we are all striving for. And I've turned that around in my head now. I see us as working away from bad things, away from chaos, and, but adapting that to our needs and to our circumstances and continuing to make that better and better and better. I see that as moving away from bad things as opposed to moving to the one good ideal. But everything about Christianity's conception of the world is locked into a top-down.
Yes. I see that a lot from our dear friend Eric Hovind.
I know.
I've dealt with him, and everything is from that top down, and it's very hard to get past it, because one of the things I've noticed with him and with a lot of other folks, and this is going to be a double-sided question here, that whatever you tell them, they have managed to turn around in some way, to massage until they get what they want out of it. How do they learn that, and how do you counter it?
Okay, there's a couple of things. First of all, someone like Eric Hovind is never, ever, ever going to hear what you say. They're going to hear what you want to hear. And some of them, like him, who is a combination of an abuse victim, an insecure, and a bit of a shyster, he might be a lost cause. I think the most important thing, and one of the reasons that I've started this series and that I'm going to continue it, is I want people to understand some of the fundamental underlying ideologies, because you cannot let them get you down the rabbit hole.
Yes.
If they get you defending some crazy bullshit on their terms, don't do it. I don't care how stupid it is. Don't touch it. Go right for the core. Go, why does this have to come from an authority? Well, what else could it come from? Reality, facts, you know? Verifiable reality that we observe, all of us, every day of our lives. Why does that need an authority? And why does it need an authority is a question that ultimately, whatever else they say, they're just going to come around to it just does.
And that's Seitan Bruggenkate's thing. He'll start his tract with that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, and that is a very unnerving thing. And there it is. I mean, you cannot get past him. Can you get past any of his minions, his followers, or Eric's minions, Eric's followers? Is there a way to get to them?
I have encountered, it's going to depend on them. I have encountered believers who are, and particularly with the presuppositionalists, their idea is that for you and I, we are atheists, and the Bible says, at least some parts of it say, that we are just denying God and suppressing truth in our unrighteousness to sin.
Right, yes, Romans,
therefore,
whatever the hell.
That, and that's another thing about authority, that verse is apparently a better authority on what I think and feel than me, which I don't claim the argument from authority on a lot of things, but if there's one thing I'm a fucking authority on, it's what's going on inside my own goddamn head.
Yes.
You know, like...
And you're the only authority in many cases. I mean, I cannot tell you the side thought. I'm sorry. You cannot know the side thoughts that are going through my head as we're talking here. The only way you could know is if I told you, and even then, I could be lying.
Absolutely, absolutely. And this is the thing, is that there are people who, you know, with that same degree of I cannot be wrong, have invested themselves in the idea that you think a certain way and you cannot talk them out of it. And I would say, don't argue with those people. Say, if you are unwilling to even listen to what I have to say about myself, then you have nothing of value to show me, because that is supremely arrogant, supremely insulting. That's beyond dishonest to imagine that you can't even be wrong about what you think is going on inside my own head, then talking with you is worthless. And that's the point that I want is for more and more people to cut to the root of the thing. And not to engage those people, not because we don't want to engage in the fight and the argument, but because we should not have to dignify people who behave so ridiculously and treat us so insultingly from the very first word. And we should treat that like the insult to our intelligence that it is.
Mm-hmm. And as you were talking about this, what came to my mind was, what is your opinion of the Socratic method? Are you familiar with Anthony Magnabosco at all?
I am. I'm familiar with the Socratic method, and I just got, though I have to read it still, Peter Boghossian's Manual for Creating Atheists.
Mm-hmm, yeah.
And that is an excellent way to do things. And again, it depends a bit on the person. Someone like Seitan's going to come right in with, that's not what you really think. And I think for myself, I have that element where I will go in and fight, and I will go, okay, that's complete bullshit. You have no right to tell me what I think. And if you're going to act in such poor faith, I'm not going to deal with you, because you are being a dishonest shit, quite frankly. But you are going to have more effective conversations in the long run if you use the Socratic method and if you ask people to think, because I'm overgiven to analyzing myself and my own thoughts, and having gone through this experience, I've thought about it probably more than is healthy. So I've considered all the ways that those ideas came to me and how they've interacted over time. Most believers haven't, you know.
Yeah, I guess
they're probably a little afraid to.
I was going to say, is it that they don't have to, or that they've been warned not to?
It becomes one of those things that you understand in a visceral sense. There's a lot of stuff, some stuff that's very clearly stated, but there's also a lot of things that are understood and that you sort of only look at with the side of your eye because you're afraid to see too closely.
Okay, yeah, I know that feeling in other areas. I mean, I'm given to panic disorder, and that works into that as well. And I suppose would one say that a lot of these folks are indeed working off a latent panic disorder, if you will? I mean, if anything.
An induced one, certainly. You know what I actually would compare it most to, more than anything else, is Stockholm Syndrome.
Okay. Please go
Christianity.
into this one. Yes.
Yeah, what Christianity is like if you take the character of God, particularly any evangelical version of God, you have an abusive father and an abusive spouse. And that, oh God, that can lead to some very creepy mix-ups when you've got Jesus, lover of my soul, and Father God in the same songs. That can be very uncomfortable. But basically, it's an abusive relationship that you are induced to have with yourself, and you must play both roles.
Okay, now does that make it easier or more difficult playing both roles? In the sense, I can see that one might know how the script is written because you're playing all the parts, but then is there the case of not knowing how to write that script in the first place, and that's why you lean on your pastor?
Well, yeah, there's that too, and there's the training to to write the script in a certain way, and you can only see God in the certain way. And I when I say you play both parts, I don't mean that the God part is really you. It's what you've been told it has to be, and so that element of the abuse does come from outside.
Okay.
But within the confines of your own mind, you've got that trained idea of this person, and you must submit yourself to it, and then you have to find the justifications. So yeah, it's basically a battered spouse.
And yes, I think many of us know how difficult it can be to pry a battered spouse out of that relationship. Well, I was there for 11 years, so I kind of know it myself.
Yeah.
Yeah, that makes it all the more difficult. And again, what sort of, I guess it's going to be supportive measures, or is one better off with supportive measures or combative measures when speaking of
Um,
something like that?
Probably supportive. I, of my nature, am probably more combative, and there is a time for that. Usually not so much for the benefit of the person you're fighting, because they're probably a lost cause, but for the benefit of people observing. As we all learned so much from watching Hitchens dismember his religious opponents
Oh
verbally.
yes. Oh yes.
And to be honest, I still have a lot of anger about having been put through so much ridiculous bullshit. And I'm sort of taking that into the fight, and that's who I am, and that's what I'm going to, yeah, I want to put that to an account. But where you can have more compassion and be more supportive, that is ultimately going to be, most of the time, the better strategy. My only concern is that good people, good-hearted people who have never been through this, will think, much as they did with the 9/11 terrorists, it can't really be their belief. That can't really be what they believe. There must be something else behind it. If I'm just supportive and make life better for them, then they'll be more comfortable, and they'll will be able to address whatever the real problem is. And one of the things that I want those people to understand, and that I want to make clear, is that is not the case. The
Okay.
belief is exactly what they say it is, and it is completely and totally the problem.
So even, I take it, even the people who appear to be used car salesmen, for the most part, are actually believing this stuff.
I think so. There are some of them, you're kind of Joel Osteen plastic types that I look at and go, yeah, no, I think he's just a shyster. Or that, whatever that god-awful evangelical preacher was who got people to buy him a third plane because God, and then
Oh, that
he was
foo-foo head, yeah.
laughing about it in the video. Yeah, thank you guys, you got it, and God, it's a bit of a Freudian slip there. There are definitely, particularly at the upper levels of your televangelists, complete shysters who don't believe a damn thing and are just taking the flock for all they can. But 9 times out of 10, the pastor really believes.
Okay. Because because I was kind of making the assumption that somebody on the neighborhood pastor level, as a matter of fact, a couple of my friends were actually former pastors. You familiar with Objectively Subjective?
A
Used to be
little
the
bit.
Godless Iowan.
Oh, yeah, yeah, definitely.
Yeah, he was a Pentecostal pastor at one time, for example. I can understand believing this thing lock, stock, and barrel, because, what does he have to gain from it? But then you get to the point where I remember David Smalley asking Seitan Bruggencate and Eric Hovind, because he had them on Call It an After Show, and we'll get to that in a little bit, for the Dillahunty Bruggencate debate. And he actually asked, do you believe this stuff? And the looks on their faces was precious. Of course they had to say yes. But you do have to wonder, are they really believing that? And a lot of people think that Cy does. I couldn't tell you about Eric. I really couldn't.
Well, and, there's lots of stories from his father's well-documented ministry with sounds, it's tales of how he abused his son.
Yes.
How he would spank him and terrify him and be like, well, you're just going to get it worse if you don't do what I say.
The story about
that's how I want it.
The story about the dentist.
Yep. And, he was more scared of me than the dentist. That's how I wanted it. And that's the really fucked up part. That's how I wanted it. And so at the same time, I'm not always certain. And because of the great amount of self-deceit that a person is worked into, quite frankly, it could be both.
Okay, because I do know that Eric takes his father's scripts quite a bit, and I'm thinking it's not necessarily for expediency alone. No,
and his father was quite successful with a certain crowd until he was dragged off for tax fraud and money laundering and all kinds of jazz. Honest fella that, and he's still trying to push a specific narrative about it. I honestly just think that Mr. Kent Hovind is just a malignant narcissist. And
when your dissertation begins, hi, I'm Kent Hovind, you have to wonder about that
dissertation, my ass. He wrote an 8th grade essay at best to a trailer in the desert, and they printed out a piece of paper for him and put a gold sticker on it and called it a PhD.
Oh, man. And I've seen the school, that double-wide trailer out in, what the hell is it, Colorado?
That's not even. They've never even tried to be accredited. They never even submitted paperwork. This is just bullshit. Honestly, your kindergarten, award for excellence in, finger painting is a more authentic award than Kent Hovind's PhD.
I just saw something from Nicholas Lamar Suter here, in response to who believes what. The last part of that sentence really gets me, and maybe I should throw this in here. He mentions Cy does, as in believes. God came to him. What's that all about? People like S.J. Thomason claiming that they spoke with God, that they spoke with demons. Where does that stuff come from?
Okay, well, that is good. And I'm not going to be able to get into too much detail until at least the 3rd video with the demons, because demons are fun. Demons are always fun. Because the spiritual experiences that you have are largely constructed within your own mind. When you go to worship services, they will use a lot of hypnotic tactics without even being aware that that's what they're doing. They will repetition and music, and there'll be this, the cadences of everything. And it's to get you into a state where if you are suggestible enough and if you are able, you can have these dramatic, there's usually not words. It's more of like a dramatic sensation of the power of God filling you, or what you identify as. It's really just sort of an emotional ecstasy.
Don't say it, Clarion. Don't say it.
You
know where I'm going.
Oh, believe me, the amount of "I'm on my knees for Jesus and God is filling me" jokes that we could make. It just goes on forever. Someday, you know what? I should do that at some point. All the dirty worship songs and hymns. Just do a line of them.
Man, I'm pulling this necklace apart. I might as well just leave it off.
Oh yeah, I just get an extension at the clasp. But yeah, sorry, but yeah, that's the thing, and that I've actually had that experience too, where it felt like God was speaking to me, not in the sense of hearing an audible voice, but having words in your mind. And when I look back at it, and I was in this extremely stressful situation, and what I really needed was someone to tell me, it's okay, you can do this. And essentially, my mind provided me what I needed with tying it in with that sensation that I thought was God. And then I felt that I had received a word from God, and I felt encouraged, and I went forward and did the thing then was empowered to move forward in my life. And sometimes it's just that. There's also that fellow, what's his name? The true and correct idiot who says that God has revealed it to me in such a way that I can know it for certain. And that's his line.
That's Sai.
Oh, that is Sai. I thought it was someone else that started with that, and then Sai took it out. Oh,
he may not be the only one, but I know that he has pulled that one on essentially everyone.
Yeah, and this is the problem with Revelation, is that it's completely indistinguishable from either insanity or complete bullshit.
Yeah.
And so, it's like, it's nonsense, and they can't defend it, so they just stick on it like a broken record.
Oh, yeah, because I can remember, are you familiar with a YouTube channel called Catholic Answers?
I think I've seen it once or twice, yeah.
Yeah, because I took them on quite a bit, and I'm going to have to go back and do it again. But I actually talked to one of their people over the phone on the air, asking him, how do you know the difference between the revealed word of God and something that simply came out of somebody's head? And he just went around in circles. There was no answer to it, as you're basically saying here.
Yeah. There's no rational answer to it. A Catholic would, if they were being honest, say, if it agrees with the doctrines, then I know it's authentic.
Well, that's basically what he said. And then I tried to ask him, well, how do we know the doctrines were revealed? But he had me turned off at the time, because I guess it turns out that they turn the caller off while the person is speaking, so you don't interrupt with something they said that was egregiously wrong.
Well, and that's the thing. And Paul said in whichever one of the epistles I'm remembering, that, if anyone comes to you and preaches a gospel different from the one we taught you, let him be condemned. Though it be an angel of God, let him be eternally condemned. Mm-hmm. And the idea is that once they've got their ideas into you, that becomes the standard by which you judge everything, consciously or unconsciously. And a couple of youth pastors and speakers that I've heard over my life have made the incredibly foolish mistake of actually explicitly saying things like this, and I noticed. So now I'm going to tell all their secrets. Ha ha ha! Yay! But that idea that, they base things in Revelation, and they think that that's justified, that they think that everything has to come from an authority. Everything about their thought process is top down, not bottom up. I think that may be one of the reasons they so vehemently won't understand evolution, is because it doesn't have an authority.
Right. I mean, they keep coming at me personally, and I take it very many other people with, what is that ultimate authority? And you keep saying there is none, and they keep coming right back with, but what is that ultimate authority? Like a broken record. So it appears to me anyway that these particular people They don't
I've
know
told
anything else, and I think you did a pretty good job of explaining where that comes from.
Thank you. Thank you. And I've taken a lot of definitions and terminology from Aaron Ra.
Uh huh.
He's brilliant that way. But that's the thing, is that the only authority for reality is reality.
Yes.
Facts are testable, demonstrable. Eric Hovind pretends that I need the authority of God to know that reality is real. And I feel like saying to him, if I got in a conversation, I would say to him, do you really mean that the physical reality, which I have been interacting with every moment of my existence, to the point where those interactions formed my brain and my identity, and that I can keep having repeated encounters with for as long as I exist, are you telling me that that requires as much faith as God wrote a book, had a kid, and gets upset if you have the wrong kind of sex?
Yeah. Okay.
Like, that does not compute.
Now, okay, it's around the top of the hour. So if I could, yeah, I like to keep these short so they're rewatchable. Now, first
Of
thing I'm
course.
going to do is ask, are you up for an after show? If anybody on the side chat would like to
Sure,
come on
sure.
in.
How long are we talking roughly?
Okay, an after show could run as long as you wanted it to. I mean, if you feel like being here 8 hours, we could do that. I'm thinking you
Oh,
probably don't want to do that.
not quite
No,
8 hours.
usually they go an
I'll
hour or
I'll
two.
tell you what. Give me 5 minutes to get a glass of
Well,
water.
don't run away yet, because the other thing
Okay.
I wanted to do was ask you to tell everybody what you're up to in the near future.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. Well, first of all, as you know, I've started out on Twitter at Lilith Liberated, and that has become a wonderful outlet, meeting new friends, talking about ideas. Of course, you can never quite get everything into a tweet. So I've
Yeah.
started my channel. I've really just started with this Escaping Eden series, and my goal is to explain as much as possible what goes into the indoctrination of evangelicals and how that makes them think in a way that I hope will be clear to people who have never been through that. My next video is going to be on the concept of authority, on how that works in. After that, we get to the fun stuff about how the excuse for everything is demons.
Oh, yay.
You would not believe the stories, but and I
Try
understand
me.
why. There's a lot of people where you're like, no, I couldn't watch Elf. He was a demon. People look at you like, what? And it doesn't make any sense until you understand that that has been going on as a justification from the beginning, and how it becomes this sort of safety catch of, oh, maybe it's a demon.
Okay.
So,
So it's definitely not something convenient. I mean, this is actually happening as far as they're concerned.
oh, absolutely. It becomes a convenient excuse, but things like demons, things like the no true Scotsman fallacy, those aren't just bullshit that they come up with in the moment as a justification. They have been taught to think this way. And that's my goal, is to explain this is how they have been taught to think. These are the assumptions underneath, and help people hopefully to see them so that they can start challenging the assumptions instead of getting into these flailing arguments with the end branches of more ridiculous ideas.
Okay, and I want to make sure that I got the link right here, because sometimes I don't. No, I didn't get the link right. Okay, we're going to have to do that. That link is to my edit of the after show control panel, and I
You've
didn't.
got the link to my channel, correct, in the description. I just checked that.
Yes, I do have that in there, and just let them know also what that where to find you. I mean, let's have it in
Absolutely.
audio, and let's have it in the description. Here we go. This is going to work. Okay, kids. I'm going to put the link to the upcoming after show in the side chat here while Lilith continues.
Absolutely. Well, like I said, my Twitter handle is Lilith Liberated. And my YouTube channel is, I really just think it's Lilith Thompson. I'm going to have to update that.
Yeah,
But
it is that. And it's in the
yeah,
description, but let them know anyway.
it's in the description,
Yeah.
and I will be updating the title on that. I'm hoping in the next week to have my next video out.
Oh, yay! Yay!
Yay! Yeah, and if I don't, get on my case. I welcome conversation. I welcome questions. I love to talk about these things, and I love to criticize ideas. So that's my favorite thing.
Yay! This is, and it's. I'm very happy that it's your favorite thing because, as I said at the opening of the show, I'm thinking that you're one of the best voices on this subject that I've heard as long as I've been part of the creating community anyway. And I'm
Thank you
really
so
thankful.
much.
I'm really thankful for that because you straightened me out on a couple of things that I didn't quite get as somebody from the outside, and I'm hoping that the folks here in the atheist community can give you a listen, hear what you've got to say, and maybe become more effective at engaging these folks because let's face it, what we're doing right now in the you're wrong, you're wrong, you're wrong is only counterproductive. What do they
It's
call it?
true.
The backfire effect?
Yep. And thank you so much for your kind words. I'm just starting with this, and it really is wonderful to hear that, whatever initial technical learning curve there may be, that the ideas are still resonating with people, and that's always the most important thing.
Yay, definitely, and every word is definitely sincere. It's very wonderful and refreshing to have you around. And excuse me, God, I quit smoking 8 months ago, and I'm still clearing my lungs out.
Oh, yes, of course.
But hopefully, you're going to surpass me pretty darn soon in the subscription department and everything else. And
Well, you'll always have a special place in my heart for being one of the first people to put my platform out there. So thank you so much.
well, thank you. Thank you for coming by and everything, and thank you for staying around. Everybody on the side, I've got a couple of names in mind to send links to, and anyone else who would like to be on the panel of the after show, if you've got a Twitter account, send me a note here or on the Twitter account or whatever. We'll make sure that we are following each other so I can message you through Twitter a link to join the panel on the side chat. And I'm at Lavender Lady 0 on Twitter for those of you who are not yet subscribed to me. And again, Lilith, I am thanking you extremely many much. For the moment, Lilith Thompson on YouTube, Lilith Liberated on Twitter, and let's see, where are you on Hertz Rent-A-Car? No.
Oh yeah, I have to get more travel under my belt before I start getting those cards.
There we go. And
but really, truly, it's been my pleasure, Diane. Really, it has.
thank you extremely many much for coming by and for sticking around. And everybody over on the side, thank you many much for being here. It's great having you, and I hope that I hope you enjoyed having Lilith here. And we're heading over to the after show, and in order to do that, I am going to say to every one of you, thanks a lot, troops. See you on the other side. And okay.